The desert keeps secrets. Under the burning sun of Xinjiang, the Taklamakan Desert stretches for thousands of miles, a wasteland of shifting dunes and wind-carved silences. Locals call it the place you enter and never return. But beneath that silence, something human awaited. One day, explorers brushed away the sand and found a face, not a skull, not a fossil, a person. Her hair is still golden. Her lashes are still resting on her cheeks. She had been lying there for almost 4,000 years. Yet time had done her no harm. They called her the beauty of lowland. She was not alone. Across the desert, dozens more were found, men and women wrapped in felt and wool, their faces calm, their clothes bright with woven patterns. They were not ghosts, they were strangers from a world we didn't know existed. So who were they? Why had they come here, to one of the most deadliest places on earth? And how they built a life where life shouldn't exist at all. The sand of the Tarim Basin had swallowed them whole. But in doing so, they had preserved them. And when the desert finally spoke, it revealed a story older than any empire, deeper than any border, the story of migration, memory, and the human faces itself. The sand remembers. The Taklamakan Desert is not only empty land, it's a labyrinth of sand and silence. In summer, the air burns past 50 degrees. In winter, the wind freezes skin in minute. Local used to say, you enter but you never return. But thousands of years ago, life threaded itself through this wasteland. Small oases, river-fed mountain ice, and trail carved by travelers long before the Silk Road was even imagined. For centuries, the desert guarded its dead. Then in the early 1900s, explorers stumbled across something that would rewrite what we thought we knew about the ancient Asia. Searching for the lost cities of the Silk Road, they instead found bodies, dozens of them, perfectly preserved beneath the dunes. At Lowland, they uncovered a woman lying on her side, her hair still golden, her eyelashes still visible under a film of dust. She had been buried with bread, combs, and delicate woolen garments. Around her, the air was so dry that even the folds of her clothes survived. They call her the beauty of Lowland, 3,800 years old, but so intact she seemed to be merely sleeping. Soon after came others. The Churcher man, tall and bearded, his reddish hair still woven in braids. Infants wrapped in felt, mothers buried beside them. Each discovery added confusion. These people did not look like any recorded in China's ancient texts. Their features seemed foreign, yet their burial customs were unlike anything known from the West. The sand had preserved their faces, their clothes, their stories, but it had stolen their names. So who were they? Why had they come here? And how had they thrived in a place where even the wind kills? In time, archaeologists realized the desert wasn't just a graveyard. It was a time capsule. The Taklamakan had hidden a civilization, one that connected worlds long before the history said those worlds had ever met. The sand had protected their silence for nearly 4,000 years. Now it was beginning to speak. Beneath the heat and the silence of the Taklamakan, life once moved with rhythm. The people who lay buried in the sand had not wandered there by an accident. They built settlements near a river that bled out Tanshan mountains, small oases that shimmered like miracles in the emptiness. Archaeologists found traces of home made from reeds and woods. granaries filled with seeds and wheels from wooden carts. Their world was simple but advanced. A society of farmers, herders and weavers who had learned how to live at the edge of the survival. Their clothing told its own story. Felt hats, high boots, patterned wool robes dyed in reds and yellow, designs that hinted at distant connections, as if threads from faraway lands had somehow reached this isolated basin. Their weaving was astonishingly complex, proof of skill passed through generations. Even their blankets and robes were preserved, frozen in the sand's dryness. They raised sheep, goats and cattle. They harvested millet, barley and wheat, crops that came from both east and the west. Proof that this place was never truly alone. In their graves, bread was found beside combs, tools beside ornaments, symbols of care that crossed life into the death. And there was beauty here, quiet, deliberate beauty. A woman's hair braided with red cord, a child wrapped in soft felt, a man buried with his bow still at his side. The people of the Tarim were not wanderers lost to the desert. They were part of a forgotten chapter in humans' history, one that spoke in movement, exchange and connection long before the Silk Road even existed. The sand had preserved their faces, but in their hands, in their tools, in their woven threads, it had preserved something even more powerful. The proof that even in the harshest places, humans create, adapt and build worlds of meaning. This was not the edge of civilization. It was the beginning. The Tarim Basin was a crossroads disguised as a desert. To stand there was to stand at the center of ancient motion. Caravans trading between Asia and Europe. Whispers of language and myth passing from one horizon to another. What later empires would call the Silk Road was already alive here, centuries before it had a name. The people of the Tarim weren't its spectators. They were its architects. They traded wool for jade, grains for lapis, and stories of survival. Archaeologists unearthed seeds from a land far away, stones that would only have come from Afghanistan, and fabrics that carried the weaves of Persia. Nothing about their world was small. These were not isolated desert wanderers. They were connectors, bridges between civilization still learning to see each other. In the oasis, Nia, Lulan, Chechen, life pulsed with exchange. Caravans arrived at night, their wheels cracking over the sand. Men in layered robes led camels heavy with silk and incense. Around these fires, voices tangled, languages no one can now name. The Tarim people offered water, bread and rest. In return came tales of empires they'd never seen. Egypt, Babylon, China's early dynasties. Their genetics tells the same story the sand does. Diversity, migration, movement. They carried strands from the ancient Western Eurasians, blended with deep Asian ancestry, forming a population both local and global before those words meant anything. Their faces, blonde, dark, high-cheeked, bearded, shredded every tidy map historians once drew. The desert that surrounds their grave was once alive with roads and footprints. Wooden wheels left lines across the dunes. Hoof prints and sandals marked their path between the worlds. Each footprint was a conversation between continents. And yet, with every exchange, the sand took their share. Trade brought wealth, but also dependency. Contact brought new goods, but also new diseases, new migration, new pressure from expanding empires. The Tarim people's gift, their openness, their bridge, became the same path through which change arrived. What remained of them is more than mummies. It's a message about us, that humanity has never been still, that borders are temporary. The connection has always been the oldest instinct we share. The Tarim were not lost to time. They were part of its pulse. And when they vanished, the desert carried their rhythm onwards. For centuries, the Tarim people thrived where no one else dared. But deserts are never still. What gives life one century can take it away the next. The rivers that once fed the oasis began to dry. Winds shifted, storms grew harsher, and the land turned against its own inhabitants. What had been shallow lakes became dust. Fields withered. The same sand that preserved their ancestors now began to consume their world grain by grain. Trade routes changed too. New empires rose along the Silk Road, redrawing maps and redirecting wealth. Caravans no longer stopped at the Tarim oasis. They moved north and south, following safer paths. Without trade, without water, their towns began to fade. Archaeologists can still see it. The final chapter written in dust, a half-buried home, its walls collapsing inwards, a loom still standing where someone had once woven bright wool, a graveyard overtaken by dunes, coffin shaped like boats, half exposed by winds. These aren't ruins of war, but of time. Climate had silenced them as surely as conquest silences nations. By around 400 BCE, many Tarim settlements are already gone. Those who remained may have merged with migration groups, Tocharians, Sogdians, the early people of the Silk Road, carrying fragments of Tarim blood, words and craft into new world. But the desert, as always, took what it wanted. Lowland became a ghost city. The church and valley turned to dust. The same winds that once cooled their faces now buried their names. And yet, even in the vanishing, they left something enduring. A trace in the sand, a thread of DNA, a shoe of face, the kind of proof that says, we were here and we mattered. The desert does not forget. It only hides what it loves too much to destroy. The Tarim people vanished long before history learned to write their names. Their cities became sand, their rivers turned to dust, and their language fell silent. Yet what they left behind defies silence. When the wind uncovered their faces, it was not a discovery, it was a reunion. Those eyes, sealed in time, yet still alive with expressions, looked back at us from 4,000 years ago. They weren't myth or strangers, they were us. Proof that humanity has always been a single thread, stretched across distance and time. The Tarim Mummies rewrote the story of civilization. Their preserved features, their woven rolls, their seeds and tools all tell a truth older than empires, that no culture ever begins in isolation. The world was already connecting long before kings and borders drew lines to divide it. These people carried the evidence of their bodies. Western and eastern trails blended in a single face, fabrics of wool traded from far lands, grains from two hemispheres in the same vessel. They lived in a desert, but they were not cut off. They were part of a living network, a web of travelers, farmers, and dreamers who built foundations of what would become the Silk Road. And when their oases dried up and their homes fell to sand, their legacy slipped quietly beneath our feet, waiting for us to remember. Archaeologists today still holds fragments of their world, a child's felt hat, a carved woven wheel, a shoe that could have walked down a modern street. These small fragile things speak louder than monuments. They remind us that history's greatest wonders are not always built from stone or gold. Sometimes they are woven, worn, and burned in silence. And so the Tarim people did not vanish. They crossed into memory, carried by wind, by science, by the gaze of every person who looks at their faces and feels the pull of recognition. Because what survives of them is not just their flesh or their artifacts. It's their story, one that binds desert to oceans, ancient to modern, us to them. The sand remembers. It buries their bodies, but it preserves their truth. That humanity has never been separate. We have always been one journey, just scattered by time, waiting to be found again. Thank you for watching CTT Stories. The Tarim people vanished into the desert, but their faces survived the wind. If this story reaches you, help it reach someone else as well. Let their faces travel again, carried this time by memory, not wind. Subscribe for more stories carved from time. Stay curious, stay human, And remember, every grain of sand once held a story. Catch you in the next one.